This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, Florida's lieutenant governor enters the U.S. Senate race. A judge sets a September deadline for the legislature to draw new congressional districts. Will the Republicans give up on the District 13 congressional seat? And a new group is trying to put a second solar energy amendment on the ballot. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorai.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are Mike Deason is senior investigative reporter at 10 News. Mike Fasano is the Pasco County tax collector. He's a former state legislator and a Republican. Amy Hollyfield is deputy managing editor for politics and business at the Tampa Bay Times. And Barry Edwards is a political strategist and a Democrat. Well, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming. Well, this week, Lieutenant Governor Carlos Lopez Cantera entered the race for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by his close friend Marco Rubio, who is running for president. Lopez Cantera, a 41-year-old Republican, joins two other Republicans who are already in the race. And there's a possibility that more Republicans will get in. The Democrats who've announced so far, Congressman Patrick Murphy and Congressman Alan Grayson and Attorney Pam Keith. The race is expected to draw national attention from both major parties and the media as it's seen as a possible Democratic pickup. So, Amy, let's start with the lieutenant governor. What's his track record? What's he accomplished both as lieutenant governor and before that when he was a local elected official?
There was a terrific editorial cartoon in today's Tampa Bay Times that illustrates that. It's pretty much a blank slate. There's really not much to his record other than being a really close friend of Marco Rubio. That's pretty much his claim to fame. You can't sit here and say he did this when he was a lawmaker. You can't see anything he's done as lieutenant governor. He pretty much doesn't do it much. His schedule's often blank. He's just not. There's no real mark that he's made.
So he may not be the strongest candidate in this Republican field.
That's not to say he wouldn't be a good candidate because he's from South Florida and because he gets that strong base because of Marco Rubio. But as far as accomplishments, legislative accomplishments, there's nothing there.
There's been a drastic change, though, in his schedule since Marco announced that he was not going to run for the Senate seat. We did a story earlier this week. Prior to Marco's announcement, he came to the voter-rich I-4, I-75 corridor once every 45 days. Since Marco announced that he was not going to run, once every 9 days. He's in one of these big areas where he's hoping to get votes for the primary. So you can see what he's trying to accomplish as lieutenant governor, and that's to go to the U.S. Senate.
Mike, are there any other big-name Republicans who are thinking about getting in this race that you've heard of?
Well, sure. Jeff Miller, who's the congressman from the Panhandle and who I served with in the Florida legislature, I think he's looking at it. And I think Congressman Jolly, whose seat probably won't exist after the redistricting come this September, October, I think he's looking at it. I believe that you're going to have quite a unique or a fun, exciting primary for the U.S. Senate.
Mm-hmm. What are you hearing about it?
I hear that Jeff Miller will not get in if David Jolly gets in. I would expect David to announce sometime next week. And I think that just geographically, when you look at the votes in a Republican primary, 26% are in the I-4 corridor. And David Jolly had the unique gift now. By running a special election, he had much higher coverage, and he has much higher NAM ID than a first-term or second-term congressman would have. So you got higher NAM ID than he should have relative to a time served, and it's all in an area where Republican vote-rich are. So I think that he's going to be the instant front runner, and I think there's been some polls out showing that he's 10, 11 points up over the next people.
And Jolly has, if he can get the nomination, an advantage because when he initially ran for Congress, he was much further to the right, but since the election, he has tacked much more to the center, which is what you have to do to win what is going to be a tough race for the U.S. Senate. So I think he has positioned himself well if he can get the nomination.
That's good for the general, but if you're running in the primary and you're looking at the Republican base, who was the strongest person, most conservative, would you say, Amy, in that field of Republicans that we've mentioned so far?
That's definitely Ron DeSantis, who is Tea Party conservative. In fact, some people are concerned that he's too conservative for a general election, that he would be, sort of a Todd Akin, Sharon Angle sort of candidate who could just throw it off the rails. But David Jolly also has the concern of being attacked from the liberal side because he does support same-sex marriage. He did vote against the House Republican budget that's supported Medicare. He's got some votes that aren't necessarily fabulous in a Republican primary.
But if he gets to the general, he is he's a much stronger candidate for the Republicans than I think any of the other people.
And I think his temperament is going to be very appealing. I think that's why he was able to beat Alex Sink. Temperamentally and ideologically, in fact, I wrote an article for your paper. He looks exactly like what historically wins. And I think in a general election, if Jeb Bush, who's the most likely candidate to be the nominee, or Marco Rubio, who's the second most likely.
Not Donald Trump?
Then I think they would pull him over the top. If you're Jeb Bush, who would you rather have on the ballot? And I think this is a question people ought to ask. Would you rather have Ron DeSantis or David Jolly on as a Senate? They don't want a repeat of having a Catherine Harris. So I think you're going to see pushing from the establishment for David Jolly for that reason.
Right now, one of the problems for all these candidates is name ID on a statewide level. It's in corners. And so fundraising is going to be hugely important. Ron DeSantis posted a big number this week for his fundraising. But then you've got the talk of maybe Bill McCollum even jumping in. And that's somebody who would totally change the landscape because he has the statewide ID.
Mm-hmm. Mike Fasano, one more question. Yes. Do you think Marco Rubio is in the presidential race to stay?
It all depends. In my opinion, I think if he doesn't pick up ground over the next 5-6 months, you'll probably see him either one, take his money and hold off till the next gubernatorial election here in Florida, or run for the U.S. Senate. So he might surprise all of these people and potential candidates that are looking at running for the U.S. Senate. It wouldn't surprise me. He's done it before where he said something and has done something entirely different, and there's a good chance he might do it again.
And one final comment. I think Gwen Graham is out of a district. Either however you draw it, she's done. So does she wait 2 years and run for governor or Senate if Bill Nelson retired, or does she get in now and do what Charlie Crist did against against Bob Graham in '98? Build a statewide organization. If she wins and she's the nominee and she wins the election, she's a U.S. Senator. If she loses, she would be instantly the front runner for the Democratic nomination for governor.
Well, let's talk about the existing Democratic possibilities in that U.S. Senate race: Alan Grayson and Patrick Murphy. So we've got the liberal firebrand Grayson coming out of the Orlando area, Patrick Murphy coming out of the East Coast. Moderate, already doing well though, picked up a lot of endorsements. So how would you handicap that race?
I think that right now, I think that the base of the Democratic Party, even though the progressives don't like to admit it, are moderates. I mean, more people define themselves ideologically as moderates in the Democratic Party than the ultra-left or progressives. But if Gwen Graham gets in, she has the one factor: she's a woman. In fact, I talked to some liberal activists here that would not like her voting record, but they liked her because she was a woman. And so I think that she's going to have a huge advantage. Plus, she's got the best strategist in Florida politics, Bob Graham.
And Grayson is, to many people, a loose cannon. I mean, he's the Donald Trump of Florida politics. You don't know what he is going to say.
He's the Alan West of Florida politics on the Democratic side.
But he is a hero to some of those hardcore progressive and liberals in the Democratic base.
Yeah, but you've got to look ahead to the general. If you're smart, you've got to look ahead to the general election. As Barry says, that is not reflective of most of the Democrats, and he will have a big problem where Murphy, who once was a Republican, could appeal across party lines and makes for a much better candidate to win. Again, getting the nomination. But I don't see Grayson as there's going to be a lot of negative publicity. His divorce certainly will come in from some annulment. Yeah, but for some PAC groups, I don't see Murphy doing it, but you'll see some groups running ads about it. Grayson could be a disaster.
If progressives won, if the ultra-left won the Democratic primaries, Nan Rich would have been the nominee over Charlie Crist. There's always a reason why they don't lose. There's always some excuse. But the fact is, Nan Rich was a credible candidate who was bright, was the Senate Democratic leader, and she got 30% of the vote against Charlie Crist. So if they have all these people that wanted to vote for the progressive candidate, why didn't they vote for one?
And there is another Democrat in the race already announced, Pam Keith. She's a lawyer. It's her first time running for office. Some people like her, but she, when we talk about these races, Pam's name almost never comes up when you talk about Grayson and Murphy. It would be her first elected office, Amy. Is she getting any traction?
Hardly any that I've seen.
Yeah, okay. Well, a Tallahassee judge has ordered the state legislature to finish drawing new congressional maps by September 25th. He wants the legislature to submit a plan by this coming Wednesday.
The state Supreme Court ruled earlier this month that the existing congressional maps violate the Fair Districts provisions of the state constitution and were drawn by the legislature with unconstitutional intent to favor the Republican Party and incumbent lawmakers. The Supreme Court gave lawmakers 100 days until October 17th to revise the map and also have it reviewed by the trial court and approved by the Florida Supreme Court. Democrats appear skeptical even of the new process. State Representative Janet Cruz of Tampa wrote an open letter to the House and Senate leaders this week, admonishing them to keep the process totally open. Meantime, Democratic State Representative Dwight Dudley wants to establish an independent, bipartisan redistricting commission. The proposed commission would be responsible for drawing political boundaries for Congress and the state legislature.
So, Mike Fasano, could the legislature fight this before the maps are actually drawn? Could they appeal this?
They can. They can go to a federal judge or to an appellate court, if you will, at the federal level and try and get them to stay the decision and to move it on to a federal judge, maybe even to the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't think that's going to happen. They've already spent $8.1 million fighting something that's totally unconstitutional. They've given it 2 tries, and they've been told that they're wrong again by the Florida Supreme Court. So now I think you'll probably hear sometime early next week that they're going to announce the special session. They'll go in. The Tallahassee judge has said, come back and make certain you come back with a plan by, I think, the middle or the latter part of September, which gives the courts the time to make a decision whether they're good or not. And if they don't get it right, if they don't get it right a third time, you know what's going to happen? The court's going to draw these districts. And maybe in a way it might be the good thing to go, the direction to go.
Now, State Representative Janet Cruz has said, written an open letter to the legislators saying that she wants this process to be absolutely transparent, and she's written kind of a cautionary letter to the legislators. Is that unprecedented or?
No, it's not unprecedented, and good for her, because I saw when I was in the legislature of how these districts were drawn and the secrecy and the back and forth from the House and the Senate, the chairmen of both of the redistricting committees in the House and the Senate. It was all done in secret, and then all of a sudden they would find a plan on your desk the next day to vote on. This has to be an open process, because if it's not, they're going to be thrown out again, and either the courts are going to be redrawing these districts, or they're going to have to come back a fourth
Mike,
time.
but it's been like that forever in the legislature. When I first came to Florida 34 years ago, if you didn't vote in the Democratic primary, you didn't vote, yes, because the Democrats did the same thing, yes, when they were in power. The politicians in Tallahassee can't help themselves, and they've got a self-interest in drawing a district to protect their own. The Arizona ruling that says an independent commission is legal, the Supreme Court ruled that Arizona could do that, to me seems like the most sensible way for us to get fair districts.
So Representative Dwight Dudley from St. Petersburg says he wants an independent commission, but what would it take to have an independent commission here in Florida? It's tough. Why?
Well, and let's put this in historical perspective. In 1998, we had a Constitutional Revision Commission of 34 Floridians appointed by the governor, the Senate President, Speaker, Chief Justice, and the Attorney General. They came within one vote. Dexter Douglas had one vote away. Or actually, they had passed it to put an amendment on the ballot to do an independent commission. And Stan Marshall flipped his vote, and it became a partisan issue, and it failed. So we were close. But to do it again, we'd have to collect 8% of the signatures from the last election, which is 683,000. You have to write the amendment. You have to, after about 800,000, you have to get it approved by the Supreme Court. Then you have to collect another 600,000 signatures. My sources at the marijuana people say that average is about $3 a signature. So somebody's going to have to put up $3 million to get the signatures. Then you're going to have it passed by 60%. So that's highly unlikely. But here's the real important thing. Even if you have an independent commission, like the Cook Report just did an analysis of the Supreme Court ruling, they think that the congressional seats are going to go to 18 Republican and 9 Democrat. That Republicans will actually gain a seat.
After the maps are redrawn? After
the maps are redrawn. But the problem we have with fair districts, and the University of Michigan did a study called the Tobler effect, that the way people live affects how you draw the districts. Democrats we have more minorities than Democrats. We have Hispanics, we have blacks, and we have Jews down in South Florida, and they tend to be in concentrated urban areas. So even if you had an independent commission, the legislature would, right now I think, got 63% of the legislature is Republican. If under a totally independent commission, it would only drop to 62%. So there aren't panaceas just because of the way we live. So the reality is, until people move around, unless you have partisan fairness, which would mean you'd have every district in the state would look like Corinne Brown.
But that's not what the ruling is. It's that they've got to be fair districts, and as you say, there is the concentration of the Democrats within the cities. But it's so ironic that the state of Florida, which has almost 100,000 more registered Democrats, is so dominated by the Republican Party, and certainly the way that the districts are set up now fosters that to some extent.
Right.
Okay, so the congressional districts are in play, but also one of the other shoes that's got to drop is a decision has to be made about the fairness of the state Senate maps. Now, when is that going to happen?
Well, that's a great question because that's still in the courts as well. In fact, the legislature, Florida legislature, Florida leadership in Tallahassee has asked the courts to hold off in any court hearings on that matter until they can take care of the redistricting of the congressional seats. My hope is the judge will say absolutely not. Let's continue in regards to the Senate seats. But to save the taxpayers' money and do something right for a change, what they ought to do is, while they're up there redrawing the congressional maps, get permission to go ahead and redraw the Senate maps, because it's only a matter of time that the courts are going to say you need to come back here and redraw the state Senate maps as well.
No court has made that decision yet.
No.
So the legislature would have to say, okay, before the court even makes a decision, we're going to go in and redraw the Senate maps.
Absolutely, and they have every right to do that.
They have the right to do that?
Absolutely.
One thing we're not talking about here is this year in Tallahassee, nobody's gotten along. We've literally been in session most of this year. We're going back into special session in August. Committee hearings start in September. The session next year starts in January. And this hasn't gone right. And now you're talking about basically playing 52-card pickup with the state. And I just don't see it going well, even though they've got forced and they've got very specific plans.
And Amy, just remind us, both the State House and the State Senate would have to sign off on these new maps, right? And the State House and the State Senate are not getting along.
They are not.
Yeah. Okay.
And an important thing, the governor has to sign the congressional redistricting. The governor does not have a role in legislative. It's a what do you call them? Joint resolution?
It's
a joint resolution. So only the House and the Senate have any control over the
And I will tell you this, that in my opinion, although I think it's fact, the Florida House would love nothing more than to have control in some way of redrawing the Senate seats for 2016.
Very interesting. All right. Well, there are indications that because of the next round of redistricting, Republican Congressman David Jolly, who represents Pinellas County in Congress, may give up that seat to run for the U.S. Senate.
His District 13 seat may well see more Democratic voters added, making his re-election much harder. Already a lot of possible Democrats' names have been floated as potential candidates for that district. There is one announced Democratic candidate already, Eric Lynn, and he's already raised a formidable amount of campaign donations. But as of yet, no big-name Republican has stepped up, with former Mayor Rick Baker among the most likely to jump in. But he told the Tampa Bay Times this week that it's too early to decide because of the uncertainty over what the district map will look like. And as Adam Smith tells us in the Times this week, there's some irony in the GOP writing off the district because the modern Florida Republican Party began its revival there when William Kramer won election to Congress from Pinellas County back in 1955, becoming the first Florida Republican elected to Congress since Reconstruction. The seat was eventually held by Bill Young and now by David Jolly.
So, Barry, the first question is David Jolly, in your opinion, is he jumping into that race?
I think that next week you'll see him in the U.S. Senate race.
Yeah, okay. So the second question is, of the Democrats who are out there, what Democrats are you hearing about who are most interested in running for that seat?
I think there was a lot of interest by a lot of Democrats. And then one behemoth who actually just ran for something named Charlie Crist, who's obviously searching for an office to run for, said this would be perfect. It's in his backyard. I mean, it fell into his lap. I mean, of all the things that could happen to him, I mean, he was really out of politics. And then he's resurrected. He's like the phoenix rising from the ashes.
But don't you think Ken Welch could give Charlie a run for the money? I think Charlie can have.
We did some polling on African Americans. Darrell Rasan had the highest favorable amongst any African Americans in Pinellas. Ken was second, and Renee Flowers. And all three of them are strong candidates.
But not compared to Charlie.
Charlie Crist has name ID is double even Darrell's.
Okay, let me just throw something at you. Rick Baker picks up a lot of votes on the South Side, former Republican mayor of St. Petersburg.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, could he jump in the race?
Rick Baker, first of all, was a great mayor, a friend of mine. I love him as a mayor. Okay, but he ran against Ed Helm, and he got 70% of the vote. So That's not that tough to do. But more importantly, he didn't have an R by his name. It was a nonpartisan mayor. We know that nationwide, wherever you put a partisan moniker, Republican Rick Baker versus Democratic Charlie Crist, African Americans have a tendency to vote 91 to 93% for the Democrat.
The partisan.
And so they're going to ask the question in a federalized race, Rick Baker, are you for marriage equality? No. Are you for climate change, or do you believe in climate change? No. Are you for Medicaid expansion? No. I think those are difficult issues for a Republican to overcome. And so I think he's the only one. So I don't think they compete in it because districts do matter. That's why we're fighting over redistricting.
All right, Mike, let me ask you the Charlie Crist question because you are very you are very close to Charlie Crist. Tell me, what do you know? What can you tell us?
Well, I can only tell you what I hear, and and speaking with people, I have a good feeling, a very good feeling that you'll probably see if it's true the legislature does announced that they're going to go into a special session, and the probability of the Jolly seat becoming predominantly a Democratic district, I think probably in the next 30 days or so, you'll probably see Charlie Crist jump into that seat.
Mm-hmm. So, Amy, if they take the Democratic corner of St. Petersburg out of Kathy Castor's district, District 14, and put it over in District 13, the David Jolly seat, what does that do to Castor? Does that make Kathy Castor, the Democrat, vulnerable?
I don't think so. She's got an established record. It's not going to become a Republican district. It's still going to be Democratic. It's very interesting what's going to happen in Tampa Bay because the redistricting ruling said you can't put the districts across water. It's actually going to simplify things, and I think it's going to help the candidates in Pinellas, and it's going to help the candidates in Hillsborough too, because that's been sort of an awkward straddle that they've had to make across the counties.
Because for some people, if you live in St. Petersburg, you don't know who your member of Congress is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not a contiguous district as it is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Her district right now is a plus 14 Democratic district, so it's like Jesus Christ would lose as a Republican. It's going to go to a plus 7 Democratic. So
but Mike,
it's still very overwhelming.
Mike Deason, there are a lot of Republicans whose names are being floated as saying they would like to challenge or are thinking about challenging Kathy Castor.
She has been a very successful congressperson. South Tampa will come out very strongly for Kathy Castor.
She's been pretty moderate too. She hasn't been this liberal Democrat. Right. She's been there, and she's spent a lot of time on the economy. She's spent a lot of time on getting things for Tampa Bay.
And the Castor name. I mean, you can't discount Betty. The Castor name is well entrenched in Florida politics. She would have to have a major faux pas.
But even
to
with
lose.
that, it's a plus 7 Democratic district. So Kathy Castor Democrat versus Kathy Castor Republican is going to win by 14 points. So it's just not in a Republican wave year. It's just not competitive.
All right. Well, next year, Florida voters could wind up having to vote on 2 rival proposals dealing with solar energy. A group billing itself as Consumers for Smart Solar announced this week that it's launching a petition drive to place an amendment dealing with solar energy on the 2016 ballot.
The amendment is billed as an alternative to another proposal dealing with solar power. That amendment is backed by Floridians for Solar Choice. If approved by voters, it would prevent the state from regulating small private solar companies that provide up to 2 megawatts of solar energy to properties that border them. The rival amendment, pushed by Consumers for Smart Solar, would allow homeowners to own or lease solar equipment in order to power their homes. But it would permit state government to continue to regulate solar energy providers. Tori Perfetti, a conservative activist and chair of Floridians for Solar Choice, questioned the motives behind the newly proposed amendment. He said the ballot measure appears to be a very slickly devised campaign to confuse voters.
So, Mike Deason, what's going on here?
Well, this whole area is the poster child for strange bedfellows because you have the Tea Party people and progressives saying we need to bring solar, and so they came together and the First Amendment got going. And then the next group said, no, wait, that First Amendment favors big out-of-state power companies, and we've got to get another amendment that favors the local guy. I think there is a strong belief in solar power, except for the utility companies and the Attorney General, who is helping to fight those ballot measures. But the competing sides on these amendments are saying the first thing seemed to be good, but there was a wolf in sheep's clothing on that, and that's why I think they came up with the Second Amendment, which they think is more palatable to them. But again, it's the strange groups.
And an environmental group came out this week and said Florida Power and Light is actually behind the Second Amendment.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll see where it goes. Well, before we go, what other news stories should we be paying attention to? And Mike, let me start with you.
With the special session probably coming up for redistricting and the redrawing of congressional, possibly even Senate, don't be surprised that we see termed out legislators start opening their accounts for Senate seats and congressional seats.
As if they had no term limits.
That's correct.
All right, going around. And Barry Edwards.
Next Tuesday, the ballots go out in the St. Pete city municipal elections for the primary that's held in August, and this will change the balance of power on the Pier and on the Rays and several other logjams in the city government.
Do you think the Pier decision might come back again?
Who knows? But you're going to have this is going to.
It would save us some money because then we wouldn't have to redo this set.
It's the big decision is the Rays, and that's tied at 4-4. And so whoever wins in the Wingate-Newton seat, if they keep it, it's going to be locked. If they switch their vote, then Kreisman will prevail. Right. So it's a big deal.
Amy, your other big story.
There's a story in Sunday's Tampa Bay Times about the state changing the driver's license written test, and they changed it in January, and since then 3 out of every 5 drivers has failed the test. There's an alarming failure rate, and they're scrambling to make it better.
Okay, Mike Deason, your other big story.
We did a story Thursday night, sort of self-serving, about untested rape kits. In the state of Florida, there are 5,000 rape kits where a victim has been sexually assaulted. They undergo the rape kit test, which many women say is humiliating, and they sit on the shelf and never sent to FDLE and never sent to the database. So to me, it is appalling. Some agencies have changed, but for example, in Polk County, they have 500 untested rape kits sitting on the shelf. And 5 of the Florida cities are in the top 30 in the country in untested rape kits. It's appalling.
Well, thank you all for another good show, and thank you for watching Florida This Week. We want to hear from you. You can write us at ftw@wedu.org or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. And you can watch this show online on the wedu.org website beginning Monday morning. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And from all of us here at WEDU, have a great weekend.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.